Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more, comment down below. And stepped through with a thoughtful expression. His mind was a hive of activity as he instinctually stepped over old cups of ramen and a broken, disused puppet he had never gotten around to shifting. He collapsed into the comfy swivel chair he had managed to find out behind the apartment block and kept in front of his workbench. Right now, his eyes weren't on the odd mechanisms and stray puppet components strewn across the wooden surface, but staring blankly ahead, wrapped up in his own thoughts. The mission to Wave had certainly been both an eye-opening and enlightening experience, in many aspects. In truth, it was his very first mission, D ranks excluded for obvious reasons, and it had taught him many things he didn't know. He had learned what was necessary and unnecessary on missions, and would begin to organize his pockets and sealing scrolls accordingly. He would also begin to carry around sealing scrolls capable of carrying human bodies so a bounty wouldn't slip through his fingers. With the new arrangement with Nami no Kuni, he now wasn't exactly hurting for money. On the contrary, he would soon have more than he knew what to do with, but it couldn't hurt to be prepared. On a similar vein, having both Ramia and Dami destroyed on the same mission told him that he either needed to get faster at fixing his puppets, or he needed to bring spares. He wouldn't always have the grace of a few days between conflicts and, as Sasuke's fight with him had shown, he only had limited uses without his puppeteering. He absently looked down at the Senbon launcher on his wrist, another thing he would be upgrading and working with due to how effective it had shown to be, making up for his body's limitations. He would also be upgrading all his puppets to include Senbon after seeing how effective they had made Ramia. The other eye-opening fight was with Haku. The boy had beaten him, the very first time Naruto had tasted defeat. He couldn't say he was disappointed by it though. Under different circumstances it may have been fatal, but as a friendly spar it simply pointed out his flaws. Namely, it brought to light his body's weakness, and his dependence on puppets. Training in taijutsu would surely fix that, but, to be honest, Naruto wasn't one for physical exertion. He would rather find another way to overcome this particular problem. He left his mind to mull it over in the background as it moved on to more relevant thoughts. That brought Naruto up to his final, and possibly largest revelation. His new information network. A grin slowly spread his cheeks as he suddenly pushed off his workbench, spinning about on his chair in his excitement. He couldn't believe he had actually done it. His very first mission, and he actually had managed to build a small, effective network of spies. Sure, it was in its infancy and currently he couldn't exactly control what information was brought to him, but once again Naruto trusted that he would come to learn the best way to handle it, as he always had done. Naruto groaned piteously into his hands, slumping forward to lay his head against the workbench. It hadn't been used as such in a while. Right now, it was stacked with books on politics, economics and business management. They were subjects Naruto had a decent grasp of thanks to the academy, but apparently not to the level where he could manage an entire country. He groaned again and slowly banged his head into the wood. It had been almost 2 weeks since the mission to Nami, and Naruto only found his workload growing by the day. At the time, he thought it ingenious to have his spies deliver him his information and money through the deliveries between Nami and Konoha that had started up again once the bridge was completed. What he hadn't expected was for them to bring him everything. Report after report built up on his desk and he just couldn't handle it all. He was only 13. He honestly felt as though he had bitten off more than he could chew here. All the same though, he suffered through the sleepless nights, as he had done through the academy, and he bore with it. He could only hope that it would get better. He was suffering. He hadn't even had the chance to make any of the modifications to his puppets that he wanted, nor could he even really practice much. His fingers were used to directing dangerous and deadly puppets, not writing business reports and economic statements. Naruto had a natural flair for on-the-fly planning and tactics. Long-term strategy was never a particularly strong suit of his. The shadows under his eyes were only growing, and he was becoming increasingly irritable with his lack of sleep, or at least, his greater lack of sleep than usual. He needed help. But it wasn't as though he could simply walk up to the Hokage and tell him he had decided to take over Nami no Kuni on what amounted to a whim and now he was buckling under the workload. No, He needed discreet help from somebody who wouldn't divulge his secrets, someone who could be trusted. In his frustration, Naruto sent a pile of documents crashing to the floor, breathing heavily as he just stared at the now scattered pages like his gaze could set them on fire. The people he knew and had any extended interaction with could be counted on both hands, the ones he could implicitly trust. There weren't any. Naruto had a guarded heart and didn't put his trust out there so easily. So far, none had met the expectations. He sighed morosely as he began picking the sheets back up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Perhaps if he brought his concerns to the people of Nami he had recruited. No, that wouldn't work, not after he had swooped in and saved them. He needed to maintain an image of being in control and that he knew what he was doing. It would have been perfect, if only he actually did know what he was doing. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and let out a small yawn as he dumped the stack back on his workbench, now a glorified desk. Okay, maybe not somebody he trusted, but somebody shy who, like him, didn't interact much with people and couldn't give away what he was doing. They would have to be intelligent, but naive and trusting themselves. A political background would be ideal so they would actually know what they were doing and this wouldn't all be pointless. A clan child perhaps. His graduating year was full of them, however none that he had a great deal of interaction with. Ideally he would want a clan deeply embroiled in the village's politics, like the Yamanaka, or the Hyuga. Higher. Hinata viciously struck at the training post, watching with concentrated, determined eyes as parts of the wooden pole splintered away at the touch of her chakra-laced fingers. Again she struck it, vicious accuracy in each of her strikes. A palm thrust tore another chunk off the side, and she watched in her enhanced visual state, the veins around her eyes bulging slightly, as each individual fragment of wood flew off like the beads of sweat on her forehead. Her footing changed as she shifted positions, lashing out to the side and taking another strip of wood for her effort, before finally coming full circle and striking the post with a double-palmed hit that contained all of her recent frustrations. She had to become stronger, for her team, for her father, for her sister, for him. She lashed out again, trying to clear her mind with physical exertion, but it stuck with her. She had heard the news about what had happened in Nami from Kiba, who in turn had heard it from Ino. Running into dangerous missing Nin. Having to help free a nation. All things she believed Naruto could do, but she herself felt so helpless for being unable to keep up. She could see him running ahead of her, only ever seeming to get farther away while she wallowed in the shade. So this is the prowess of the Byakugan and the famous Juken. A very familiar and very unexpected voice cut into her internal thoughts. Sure enough, when she suddenly whirled around, Naruto was watching her from the branch of a tree with a small smile, a smile Hinata had always wanted to see directed her way. Now that it was, she found her thoughts becoming a jumbled mess, her cheeks flaming up and becoming red and her hands nervously coming together in front of her, her fingers twiddling absently. Naruto-kun, she squeaked, her Byakugan deactivating, for all the help it had done her noticing him when she was so focused on her own thoughts and the post in front of her, speaking of which. I never realized it could be this vicious. Confused, Hinata turned to look at the post, only to widen her eyes in surprise. The thick wooden pole was practically shredded, shards of wood and dust littering the ground around it while the top half hung limp and pathetic by a few straining flakes of bark. Well, I mean, Hinata found that if she averted her gaze a bit it became slightly easier. A moment later and Naruto was right in front of her, still regarding her with that easy, seldom-seen smile. His hood was down, which was also a rarity in the academy, and Hinata was briefly entranced by the way his hair swayed slightly in the wind. Yes, Naruto-kun, she finally managed, not without a great deal of effort, however, the boy seemed more amused than anything. Actually Hinata, I had come to find you and ask for your help, but if you're busy training, he trailed off and turned to go only for Hinata's body to act on reflex and grab his hand. When she realized what she had done, she quickly released it like it was burning hot. No, I'm not busy, she uttered in a quiet and withdrawn voice. What do you need help with, Naruto-kun? Internally she was rather proud for achieving that much. Naruto seemed to regard her for a moment and she bit her lip tersely before he smiled and turned back to her, allowing her to breathe an internal sigh of relief. All right, if you insist. He started in a casual tone, his hands moving a bit for effect. I actually recently decided that I needed a goal for the future beyond becoming an excellent shinobi. I'm not really one to settle though, so I figured, why not aim for the top and try to become Hokage? Hinata nodded enthusiastically at that, her hands gripping the front of her bulky jacket. She could see him do it and knew he had it in him. She had always admired that, even through what she saw as unfair treatment and attitudes towards him, Naruto had never given up. He had just quietly soldiered on until she even heard people begin to call him a prodigy. Hinata knew better though, she knew just how hard Naruto must work for everything he did. He saw it in the hands he bandaged up to cover his training injuries. In the shadows under his eyes others might see as unattractive, she only saw his dedication and perseverance. He even went so far as to harm his body, as she had seen when she occasionally watched him in his apartment experimenting with poisons for his puppets. She wished for the past few years to have even a shred of that determination. I think you could do it, she uttered, for a minute thinking that Naruto hadn't heard her until he smiled bashfully. That makes one person at least. I told the Hokage and he set me some kind of test, likely just as busy work to keep me occupied so I can't pester him. He laughed to himself, but Hinata caught the twinkle of disappointment in his eye and it immediately made her stand up a little straighter. Is that what you need my help with? Naruto seemed to snap out of it and turned back to her, a bright grin spreading over his features that almost instantly set Hinata's face aflame and her heart into flutters. Actually, yeah, I'm still not used to a lot of this political stuff and I thought someone like you, with a background in a big clan like the Hyuga, might have a better grasp of it. All I really need is some insight, or a few pointers, but I mean, if you don't think. Naruto was both surprised and cut off as Hinata quickly interjected. I can do it. Her eyes were screwed shut and her hands were balled into fists just in front of her as she practically forced the words out, before cracking open her pale eyes and immediately looking down, suddenly embarrassed over her outburst. I mean, I think I can do it. Her hands came up and she gently poked her index fingers together, finding Naruto's vibrant blue eyes difficult to meet. That's great, Hinata, what do you think of these? When she looked up again, Naruto was holding a small bundle of papers. Even a cursory glance told her they looked rather complicated. However, they at least seemed familiar, similar to the ones she was forced to read over and over as a child, and continued to as her father fervently tried to prepare her for her role as the clan head. If she was honest with herself though, as much as she would like to try and unite the two branches of her family, her younger but more promising sister would likely take the position. Well, they don't seem too complicated, Naruto-kun. She looked at them again, finding a blend of financial reports, various statements from businesses and other such documents associated with managing a city or even a small country. Hokage-sama gave you these. Naruto quickly nodded, running a sheepish hand through his spike locks and causing Hinata's eyes to glaze slightly at the almost Bishunan action. She could honestly say it was more than just Naruto's determination that she felt drawn to. Yeah, apparently he made up some hypothetical country or something and asked me to manage it as though it were real. He explained, only to have Hinata nod absently as she flipped through them. I'm sure he's just trying to keep me busy, but I still want to do it to the best of my ability, ya know. In her concentration, she missed Naruto's eyes narrow ever so slightly before returning to the previous warm appearance. Really, she was just amazed at the Hokage's dedication to detail, even if it was just busy work. Then again, she shouldn't be underestimating the village's leader. Well, if this is all, then I think I should be able to help you, Naruto-kun. She nodded to affirm her statement as she handed Naruto back the stack of papers. It was all worth it, if only for the beaming smile he gave her. Thanks a lot, Hinata, that's a load off my mind. If I want to be Hokage, then failure's not an option, right? He smiled again as she gave another hurried nod. Her fingers had stopped fidgeting at some point and throughout the conversation she seemed to become more open, like a turtle emerging from its shell. Because of this, if there's ever something you need help with, don't hesitate to ask me, okay? He gave her a quick grin as she nodded her agreement and turned to leave, disappointing the blue-haired Hyuga slightly. However, he took a few steps only to turn back, as if thinking better of it. Oh, and could you not tell the Hokage about this? I don't want him to know I had help. Okay. When he spoke he had such a warm and welcoming smile Hinata couldn't help but melt as she found her eyelids becoming lidded, her head nodding on its own. Of course, Naruto-kun. She got the fright of her life as Naruto suddenly moved toward her, far closer than he had ever been before, making her cheeks redden immediately. It didn't end there though. After what seemed like a moment of hesitation on his part, he leaned in and quickly wrapped his arms around her in a brief hug. That finally proved to be a bit too much for the Hyuga heiress, and, by the time he let go, her body had gone slack and fell limply to the ground, a dazed but intensely satisfied grin occupying her lips. Naruto stepped back from the collapsed girl, a worried look briefly passing over his features before he realized she was actually unconscious. The look slipped from his face to show his usual impassive mask, his cold, lidded eyes glancing over the girl before smirking down at the papers in his hands. That was far too easy. The young puppeteer lay on the rail of the little red bridge that ran over the small stream through Training Ground 3. He, Sakura and Sasuke were currently waiting on their chronically late sensei for the daily training or mission. After the debacle in Nami no Kuni, they had briefly been demoted to D ranks once more, but Naruto was sure they would be back on the good mission soon enough. He had been making sure their team dynamic was as good as it could be, so Kakashi had little reason to keep them away from C ranks. Normally in this situation, he would be tinkering with some small mechanism, or going through one of his many dexterity exercising like flipping a Ryo coin through his fingers. Right now though, his mind was far too abuzz with activity for such mundane tasks, so he had instead taken to resting his head in his hands and looking up at the sky as he mulled them over. It did somewhat irk him that he seemed to be doing far more thinking than, well, doing lately. Hinata had been a massive help in organizing Nami no Kuni, suggesting he begin to delegate various tasks within the spy network, although she didn't know it as such, to others. He had taken this on board and created a kind of hierarchy within the group through repeated correspondence using the merchant caravan method. It was fairly reliable, as trips between Konoha and Nami only took a few hours, and the caravans came in a near constant stream making their round trips. Currently, all of the information he received from the country was routed through a woman called Raikai, a housewife before Gato had her husband and eldest son killed for being unable to pay their taxes. She had been elected as somewhat of an intermediary between Nami and him even before the reorganization, as she had been a well-known activist within the village during Gator's regime. She would do the best she could to provide orphans and other runaways board for the night using the money hidden by her late husband. Naruto rather admired her ability to continue helping her country during the nation's strife and had been glad to take her on as a direct subordinate. Now she was the one organizing what information was or was not relevant to him, which took a great deal of pressure off his shoulders. He couldn't exactly say he trusted the woman, but he knew, that she knew, that he was the best hope for their country. At that moment though his thoughts were derailed as Kakashi appeared on the bridge uncharacteristically early, a rather unwarranted smile crinkling his eye as he looked at his assembled students. Instantly Naruto was drawn to the slips of paper he was carrying as the man hopped off the railing. Good morning everyone. I know this may be a bit sudden, but I've entered you all for the Chunin exams. He took a moment to take in Sakura's shocked expression as well as Naruto and Sasuke's interested looks. These are the application forms you need to fill out. Don't worry though, it's a completely voluntary affair. If you don't feel ready then there's no pressure for you to participate. He flourished the slips a moment as he regarded each of his genin in turn. Sasuke was sure to want to enter, he would naturally see this as a challenge that he needed to overcome. As much as Kakashi hated to agree with Naruto on these things, the boy was a tad predictable. Sakura he also believed would enter, no doubt she would agonize over it for a while, but she would come to the conclusion that advancing to Chunin would be the only way to stay with Sasuke. Naruto on the other hand, he was, and continued to be, an enigma for the usually perceptive Chunin. Normally, he would say the boy would be thrilled to have an opportunity to not only advance, but also show off his puppeteering. Ever since the mission to Nami no Kuni, he just wasn't sure what to make of the boy anymore. He seemed even more secretive than usual, drawing away from the team where before he had been slowly integrating more and more into it. Kakashi would give up one of his Ika books to know what was going through that boy's mind. Hell, he wasn't even sure if the blown even wanted to get promoted. He seemed more interested in simply developing his art. Contrary to Kakashi's beliefs, at that moment Naruto couldn't be more excited, a hidden grin spreading over his lips as he took the application form. This represented a great opportunity for him as the Chunin exams were an international event. He would finally be able to show the world his hard work. Who knew? Maybe even Sasori himself might take notice. The thought alone was enough to make Naruto eager. What's more, with the situation in Nami settling, it presented a wonderful opportunity to test himself like he used to. He nodded to himself slowly as he left the bridge, Kakashi having vanished off to wherever that man tended to go, most likely to read his smut. He would need to build a new puppet, one equal to Ramia in ability. This would finally give him the push he needed to learn how to manipulate Ramia fully with only on hand. Sure, he only had a week to do it, but Naruto always worked best under pressure. As he walked down the street, his mind already patching together ideas he had already had in the past and never gotten around to acting on, he felt a chill run down his spine. Looking up, he immediately spotted the cause in the form of a young boy around his age with rusty red hair and the coldest set of teal eyes he had ever seen. It was hard for his attention not to be drawn that way, due to the boy's small stature and the comically large gourd he was carrying over his shoulder. There was also the small fact he appeared to have the kanji for love tattooed above his left eye in what could be mistaken for blood at first glance. The headband of Suna wrapped around the gourd gave away his allegiances, and at the sight of the engraved hourglass symbol he felt something in his blood stir. Tsunagaku, the original, and supposedly only uses of the puppeteering ninja arts in the elemental nations. As they passed by, the red-haired boy not giving him a second glance, Naruto couldn't help but smirk. Wouldn't Suna be surprised come this Chunin exams? However, as he passed by, he seemed to catch the eye of a boy just behind the redhead. He was dressed up in a full bodysuit and, most noticeable, had purple markings over his features. The war paint seemed a bit archaic, but Naruto ignored that in favor of the wrap bundle slung over his back and the fingerless gloves he wore. Then it was over, and the two passed one another, Naruto returning his attention to the road and the boy returning a rather more nervous gaze to the boy with the gourd and the older girl walking next to them. For the first time in a long time though, Naruto felt the stirrings of anticipation build within him. The Chunin exams had seemed inviting before. Now he couldn't wait. Sakura tittered nervously in front of Naruto's apartment door for a few minutes, occasionally bringing her hand up to knock only to hesitate and begin pacing again. This would be the first time entering a boy's home. She had always wanted that privilege to go to Sasuke, but he always rebuked her attempts to get closer. She was also a little unnerved about how quiet Naruto's apartment building was. She had expected signs of other residents, but there was nothing. It was almost as though the entire place was abandoned. The only reason she was even here was because this was the third consecutive day that Naruto had missed team training and she had finally been sent over to get him. HSE hesitated, because Naruto unnerved her at the best of times, freaking her out at the worst, although in that respect she supposed he was a bit like Shino. She eventually mustered the courage to knock, only to hear sudden clattering from inside followed by the sound of too many bolts being drawn back before Naruto finally cracked the door open. That was another reason he weirded Sakura out. He always seemed so paranoid and guarded, yet at random moments he would suddenly open up and become amicable. It was like he could turn on normal human emotions at the flip of some internal switch and go from withdrawn and introverted to easygoing and friendly. Sometimes Sakura swore that Naruto didn't even know what he wanted to be feeling, and it was just confusing at the best of times. "Oh, Sakura," he greeted a little awkwardly as he rubbed his slightly bloodshot eyes. "Ah, hey," his eyes seemed to have gained even deeper shadows than normal in the time she hadn't seen him. "What's up?" he finally offered, somewhat lamely in Sakura's opinion, as he fully opened the door. Immediately Sakura screwed her nose up as she saw the clutter that lined his floor. Old ramen tubs, which was evidently a favorite of Naruto's given the boy was holding one right now and seemed to be in the middle of eating, as well as random bits of wood or metal littered the floor randomly. "What do you mean, what's up? You missed 3 days of team training." Sakura finally lost her temper, forgetting her earlier hesitance once she saw that Naruto didn't even seem to have a valid reason beyond just not coming. "I'm here to get you, Barker." The boy just blinked before leaning out of the apartment and looking out one of the windows in the hall. "Oh, right," he once again offered without much energy, and looking into his apartment Sakura could see why. He had all his blinds and curtains closed so not a drop of natural light entered the place. It was no wonder he seemed so tired all the time and had no semblance of a natural sleep cycle if he spent so long in this place. It would also explain why he was so inexplicably pale, considering they lived in one of the sunniest nations on the continent, barring K's no Kuni. "What have you even been doing all this time?" She couldn't believe Naruto hadn't slept in 3 days, so he must have had some semblance or notion he was missing out on things. If he did, he didn't seem too upset by it. All she got for her trouble was a lame shrug as the boy slipped back into the apartment. Preparing for the Chunin exams. It was only as he turned that Sakura noticed the nasty-looking red markings running down one of his arms and part way up his neck. They looked like a terrible rash, but they were far too defined from the skin to be that. Sakura's medical training let her know that much. What? By poisoning yourself. After beginning the process of learning medical ninjutsu and the knowledge that came with it, many of Naruto's absences and following appearances back at the academy made a lot more sense to her. The blonde just shrugged as if it was no big deal what he was doing to his body. Among other things, Sakura just gaped as she followed him into the apartment, her earlier reservations pushed to the side by her shock. Anything she might have said was immediately forgotten as she stepped into what she supposed was once a living room. She had known even in the academy that Naruto had a somewhat unhealthy obsession with his puppeteering, but it only really hit her then. Pages of drawings and schematics littered the walls and floor, cluttering up what appeared to be a workbench in the corner of the room. Why you made all this? Sakura had never been more creeped out in her life as she looked about the various puppets hanging from the walls, the ceiling, and anywhere else Naruto could fit them. She could literally see the progression of his art as their faces and bodies became more defined and detailed, the woodwork becoming smoother and more professional. A few she even recognized from when he would sneak them into the taijutsu spas in the academy, only to get caught by the instructor. Huh. Naruto looked up, noodles dangling from his mouth as he quickly pulled on his jacket, flipping the hood up in a practiced motion so that a few locks of blonde hair hung out and shaded his eyes. Oh, yeah, feel free to look around I guess, he managed, after slurping up the food in his mouth. He obviously wasn't one for manners. As he went about collecting the things he would need, Sakura found her gaze drifting about, at least until her eyes fell on a particular puppet. Like most of the others, it seemed only half finished, suspended by wires as it gathered dust in a corner, apparently not having been touched in a while. Like Naruto's other combat puppet, it had a sort of half-woman, half-animal theme to it, with the body and face of a woman, although they were rather grotesque in their half-complete form, and the features of a bird. It only had one wing though and the opposite leg, giving it a malformed, misshapen look that made it stand out from the others. What happened to that one? As unsettling as she found Naruto sometimes, he didn't seem like the type to simply give up on things. He always seemed so passionate about his puppets. Naruto poked his head out from around the bathroom door, toothbrush in his mouth, and only took a single glance at the puppet in question before giving it a dismissive wave. Hein. She was a good concept, at first. I like the idea of a puppet that could fly, but would also be used for more than just recon. However, it was too difficult to put into practice. I couldn't get the wings right to sustain flight without it becoming unwholesomely inefficient. He had a few puppets that were the same, what seemed to be good ideas at first, only to find out they were useless practically. Sakura looked at the broken, unfinished puppet with a frown. It just seemed so out of place. Why keep her? She caught herself quickly. She wouldn't call these things like people, it made her sound crazy. Why keep it around then? Naruto just shrugged as he slipped back into the bathroom. The failures are just as good as the successes, they at least show me what not to do. He emerged, looking his usual overly clothed and pale self, although he now had bandages winding up his arm to hide the effects of the poison he was testing. And who knows? I might get an idea later to make her work. Shall we go then? Sakura nodded immediately, already feeling like she had spent too long inside Naruto's apartment. There was only so much crazy she could take in one day, and Naruto alone was beginning to fill her quota. As Team 7 walked into the academy for the first day of the Chunin exams, Naruto stuck towards the back of the trio. If one didn't know them very well, they might have thought he was on his own, just trailing behind a young couple. His hood was up as per usual, but for a change his orange-tinted goggles weren't hanging around his neck but actually up on his eyes. This, combined with the slight decline of his head and the way his hood shadowed his eyes, hid where he was looking so he was safe to scout about. He did this because the Suna team was not the only foreign group he had seen skulking around Konoha in the past few days, and he wanted to learn as much about the competition as he could. So as he saw his teammates turn off on the second floor to head toward the room marked 301, he almost wanted to sigh in disappointment. Honestly, he at least expected Sasuke to spot the genjutsu, if nothing else but because he should have been familiar with the academy building and where room 301 was. He was quickly proven wrong though, as Sasuke practically blurted out the presence of the genjutsu, Sakura naturally going along with him as the blonde watched on from the end of the hall. A bit of arrogant confidence Naruto could accept. It wasn't exactly out of character for the Uchiha. However, he drew the line when a young spandexed youth offered to spar with Sasuke, right before an exam they knew nothing about. Sakura nearly jumped as Naruto, who she had nearly forgotten about thanks to him trailing behind a good few feet as they walked to the academy, appeared behind them. The youth, who had identified himself as Rock Lee, took in the newcomer with his large and oddly round eyes and gave a bright, twinkling smile. "Ah, you must be Uchiha Sasuke's other teammate. It is very nice to meet you." Normally that would have come across as a fairly normal greeting, however with Lee's extremely exuberant attitude, flamboyant green clothing and shining bold cut, let's just say Naruto took a subtle step back. "I was just asking your most hip teammate if he would like to pit his title as prodigy against me, a genius of hard work." Naruto blinked once, although the gesture was lost with all the ways he was hiding his eyes. As Lee offered his hand, he seemed rather insistent. "Uzumaki Naruto," he offered somewhat blandly, as he tried to dampen the over-enthusiastic handshake before the bushy-eyed boy could dislocate his shoulder. "But if you'll excuse us, we have to go to the correct room now." Lee's smile seemed to waver a moment as his gaze flickered to Sasuke. "But, we were to pit out flames of youth against one another." Naruto quickly broke the handshake, placing his hands in his pockets as he gazed lazily at the boy. "We do not know what awaits us in the Chunin exams. Needless injury in a spar would only hinder us. I'm sure if you are indeed a genius of hard work," Naruto felt strange just saying the phrase, "then there will be ample opportunity within the exams themselves to fight Sasuke." For a moment Lee seemed indecisive before his bright grin returned. With an enthusiastic nod he gave the trio an energetic thumbs up. "You are right Naruto-san. Truly your flames of youth burn." Anything else the garishly dressed teen could say was cut off by a rather vicious chop to the back of the head by a girl of similar age. Her brown hair was styled into two buns, almost resembling panda ears. "Shut it Lee, you're going to make us late at this rate," the girl warned in a shrill, irritated voice before turning to Team 7 with an apologetic smile and a quick bow. "Sorry about Lee, you know his type." She poked herself in the temple and gave them an almost conspiratorial look. "He's a bit touched in the head." She motioned behind her congenially to the boy who, like Naruto, had been skulking at the back of the group. The eyes and the stiff posture, not to mention the long, traditionally styled hair, gave him away as a Hyuga. "I'm Tenten and he's Neji. I guess we'll see you guys in the Chunin exams. Good luck I suppose." The last part wasn't said with much energy and Neji didn't seem to share the sentiment as he looked at the trio haughtily. Naruto knew the type, he had received many a similar look from the villages when he was young. If he didn't let that get to him, ignoring this particular Hyuga's look of disdain was child's play. For a second his pale eyes seemed rather intently focused on both Sasuke and Naruto, before glancing away. At that, the two teams parted ways, Tenten practically dragging Lee one way while Team 7 headed for the other set of stairs. "Why did you stop us fighting?" Sasuke muttered as he walked to catch up with Naruto, who was uncharacteristically leading them through the academy, mostly to stop them having impromptu conversations again. "I already said, we don't know what's waiting for us in room 301, tiring yourself out wouldn't have helped in any situation." Seeing that Sasuke didn't look particularly satisfied, Naruto just sighed and turned his head to him. "Why? Did you think tall, green and bushy was going to offer much of a challenge?" It was a bit unfair, as Naruto had no idea of the Genin's abilities, but, as Sakura snickered at the nickname, Sasuke seemed mollified. It caused the blonde to quickly shake his head. Sasuke was just too predictable sometimes. Reassure him of his own inflated self-image and he was content to ignore anything he saw as beneath him. "Ah, well done, you all made it," Kakashi drawled from behind him as they crested the stairs, surprising all three genin and causing Sakura to nearly jump in shock. "Ah, Kakashi-sensei, don't do that," she shrieked, as she held a hand to her chest, irritation clearly spreading across her reddened features. Did you say something Sakura?" Kakashi muttered as he raised an eye from his book, clearly trying to be irritating for the sake of it as he immediately lowered it to look at them. But in any case, it was a good thing all three of you came. If even one of you hadn't, none would have been allowed to participate. That was an interesting nugget of information, and briefly Naruto wondered if all villages did their Chunin exams like that. He suspected not. Konoha always did seem extra focused on the whole teamwork thing. Well, I came to wish my cute little students all good luck. So, Yarne. He gave a cheeky wave and his signature smile before vanishing into a small whirlwind of leaves, leaving three flustered genin behind. They got over it quickly enough and made their way into the examination room. Thankfully, because they hadn't wasted time with Rock Lee, they were relatively early, so their entrance wasn't really noted. There were a few other teams milling about, mostly sticking in groups composed of their own villages. Naruto took the opportunity to break away from his teammates while they were distracted by all the new faces and seamlessly slipped into a nearby group of genin over by a wall. It was times like these his nondescript attire and lack of visible headband came in useful. Soon, he was able to observe people slowly filter into the room. The tense atmosphere became thicker and thicker with each new entrant. It was amusing to watch his teammates flounder a moment when they realized he had vanished, but it was quickly overridden with irritation as the rest of their generation promptly arrived. Sasuke-kun. A nose shrill squeak sounded out through the entire room, cutting any chat that there might have been as they all set their sights on the fresh meat. Kurenai's squad quickly joined Asuma's in drawing large amounts of attention to themselves. Naruto was content to keep his head low as he slipped through the crowd, not having to be nearby to hear what they were talking about. He could have fooled himself and said he was information gathering, but with nobody talking anymore except the rookies, that would have come across fairly weak. In reality, he was searching for anybody with an aura similar to that red-haired boy he had seen on the street before. Something told him to be wary around those types until he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Eventually, some gray-haired kid a few years their senior came over to tell the rookies just what kind of a ruckus they were making. The others of his year group seemed to get the idea when they turned to the rest of the room and found practically everybody glaring at them. Even Naruto couldn't resist joining in from the back. As they quietened down and the general din of the room picked back up, he slipped back through the throngs of people until he was right next to the little group. Apparently, the newcomer, Kabuto if he heard right, was offering him information on the other participants. That was an opportunity Naruto couldn't pass up. So, who would you like information on? Kabuto quietly asked as he slid his spectacles further up his nose. Sasuke looked ready to step in and ask, but Naruto beat him to it as he silently slipped out of the crowd and appeared by the dark-haired boy's side. Everyone. More than a few of the rookies jumped at his sudden appearance, while Shikamaru just seemed mollified to finally spot him, having previously been looking for the elusive blonde enigma. Kabuto on the other hand merely started, blinking rapidly as he looked down at the deck of info cards in confusion. Sorry. Did you say everyone? Naruto nodded curtly, a small smile flickering over his features as he looked up and pulled down his goggles. You said you had information on most of the exam participants, surely you would be willing to share it with your kohai. The more Konoha genin pass, the better for the village's image, right? Kabuto seemed to just gulp, not having expected this, and nervously passed the cards between his hands. Well, you see, suddenly though it didn't seem to be an issue as he turned his hands over only to realize they were empty. Naruto was already flicking through the deck, looking at each card curiously and turning them over. Hey wait, I need, in a strange stroke of luck for the blonde though, Kabuto was suddenly forced to jump back as the Oto shinobi he had previously insulted, albeit unintentionally, decided to attack. Naruto looked up to see Kabuto bend back from a rather clumsy strike from a hunched-over boy wearing bandages around his face. He blinked at the seemingly ineffective attack, as well as the odd contraption on the boy's arm Naruto's eyes were already trying to pick apart. A moment later and his curiosity was only piqued as Kabuto's cocky smile quickly turned into one of shock as his glasses cracked and he crumpled to the floor, vomiting violently. As the sound genin made some taunting remark, the front of the room exploded into a cloud of dark smoke that quickly dissipated to reveal a set of stern-looking shinobi. There will be no fighting in my exam hall, spoke the tall, bald man at the center of the new group in a gruff, no-nonsense voice. His long dark trench coat only added to his intimidating aura. Any found doing so will be immediately disqualified. Suitably cowed, the sound trio melted back into the crowd, allowing Kabuto to try and pick himself back up. Now, Welcome to the Chunin exams, maggots. I am your worst nightmare, your first proctor, Morino Ibiki. The entire room shuddered as the man smiled, a vicious gleam in his eyes. In short order, the Chunin proctors that had arrived with Ibiki ushered the assembled genin to their seats. Obviously, they had gone to some trouble to make sure that all of the teams were as equally distributed from one another as possible. Naruto barely noticed, though, as he had figured out the trick to the info cards and was currently flicking through them leisurely. Of great interest to him was the Otonin that had attacked Kabuto. However, when he located that particular card, he found it frustratingly lacking, no doubt due to the small and recent nature of their village. He kept an ear out for the rules of the exam, having already worked out it would involve some kind of written challenge from the arrangement of the room. They sounded rather standard, so as he received the test he felt ready to begin, for all of 4 seconds. One look at the questions revealed they were incredibly advanced, only increasing in difficulty as they went on. Oddly enough, when he thought back on the rule about the total points of the team allowing them to pass, he realized how ridiculously simple the exam was. Luckily for him, the first question was a relatively simply cryptograph sequence, mostly logic involved, so he cracked it in short order before proceeding to turn over the exam and lean back in his chair. He got a few odd looks from the exam proctors at finishing so quickly, but he didn't get the big deal. Ibiki had clearly said that they would pass if none of their team received 0 points, so as long as Sakura and Sasuke at least got one answer, which he was sure they were capable of, they had passed. He almost wanted to chuckle as he spotted a few genin almost tearing their hair out from the stress of the exam. For a while he returned to flipping through the deck of info cards, trying to match names to faces as he glanced about at the genin he could see. As teams were eliminated by the proctors for cheating, which was slowly beginning to rework his opinion of the test, he discarded their cards. As it became increasingly obvious that cheating was somehow supposed to be used to pass this test, Naruto just scoffed to himself. Sure, he could probably figure out some way of gathering the correct answers, but why risk a sure pass for a chance at being caught? Fools. At one point he finally managed to leave his little world and notice the fact that Hinata was sitting next to him. She had at some point sidled a little closer to him on the bench during the exam, and her exam paper was clearly angled towards him. He blinked, wondering why she would so blatantly cheat and risk her entire team's disqualification. He ignored it as best he could, though, even when she kept nervously glancing across at him like she wanted to speak, another foolish idea in the middle of a heavily observed test. Eventually, though, the time passed, and the last 15 minutes were upon them. Ibiki cleared his voice at the front to gain their attention. By this point, the room had thinned to contain less than half its original occupants, drastically reducing the number of cards in Naruto's deck. It certainly made finding specific information easier, which he continued to do as Ibiki explained the rules of the last question. It was foolish, really, the number of people that were unnerved by the simple ultimatum, especially the ones who did not belong to Konoha. Ibiki had no kind of control whether or not they could retake the exams if they weren't held in his village. Even for the Leaf Nin, it was silly. The man had clearly offered him the choice between having the chance to continue on or just give up. Only people who had no confidence in their skills would choose the latter, and even if Naruto did fail the question and, by some miracle, was barred from future Chunin exams, there were other ways to be promoted. There would always be other chances to find the reception and opportunities to show off his skill. If there weren't, he would make them. It seemed the last 45 minutes of cheating their way through the exam hadn't done much for the other participants' nerves. Hands began rising, left, right, and center, as people lost their confidence and opted out, taking their teammates with them. It obviously wasn't happening at a rate Ibiki approved of, as he decided to speed things up a little by shaking their confidence further. Naturally, he chose the person he saw as least affected by his speech, likely because it appeared Naruto was ignoring him, content to flick through his cards. In fact, as the bandana-clad man pointed in his direction, a challenging smirk on his features, he didn't even look up. What about you there, Sunshine in the Hood? Are you really stubborn enough to risk both your and your teammates' careers? You'll have no chance to advance ever again, always stuck with D ranks and C ranks until the day you retire. There was an unnerving silence as Naruto seemed to ignore the man, still flicking through the cards absently. After a period of about 20 seconds, though, where you could have heard a pin drop, Naruto flicked out a single card and looked at it with interest. Morino Ibiki, what do you know? These cards have information on the proctors as well. The dark-clothed man at the front of the room narrowed his eyes slightly, tilting his head slightly to try and get a better look at the card in question. Head of the Torture and Interrogation Department, specializing in psychological torture. Ibiki's eyes widened slightly, worried the genin was about to give the game away, when he surprised the man by groaning and leaning back, looking genuinely morose as he slapped the cards down. Damn, I guess with that kind of no-nonsense, toughening career you would be the type to hate reckless choices grounded on nothing but stubborn pride. Plus, as a Konoha shinobi I bet you must hate the idea of needlessly endangering comrades, right? He sighed again, a long, drawn-out noise that only served to enhance the tense atmosphere in the room. Ibiki was watching him intently at this point, confused to where he was going with this, but keeping his features schooled. Damn, Naruto leaned forward, looking as though he was about to stand up. I guess I oughta. I quit. Suddenly, just as it looked like Naruto was about to forfeit, a young genin at the back of the room stood up, his hand raised as he nervously declared his intentions. I quit too, screw the risk. Another genin, this one from Konoha, also stood up, and soon it seemed like the entire room was clamoring to give up in the exams. None of them noticed as Naruto smirked victoriously, subtly sitting back down as they were all ushered out of the room along with their teams. By the end of it all, the exam room had been practically decimated, only 17 teams remaining. Ironically, the only person to notice Naruto sitting back down was Hinata, someone who by all rights looked as though they were about to quit anyway. Naruto simply leaned back in his seat, a small smirk playing across his features that only Ibiki noticed. The scarred Chunin could only internally gape at what he assumed was a green genin. He was quickly re-evaluating his opinion. The boy had used the opportunity he had presented him to completely psyche out the competition. Hell, if they weren't in the middle of the Chunin exams, Ibiki might have requested the boy be sent over to T&I for a bit of formal training in psychological warfare. When it finally seemed like everybody who was still there was there to stay, Ibiki cleared his throat, quickly launching into a small speech about the significance of their choice. There were a few outraged cries from the remaining participants about the supposed pointlessness of it all, blissfully ignoring the lack of significant opposition now. In a way, Naruto was almost inclined to agree. After all, he could have bluffed his way through that initial test by simply walking in, sitting down and then not moving for the remainder of the test. It was a flimsy loophole at best, and he assumed most genin didn't have his lack of care for promotion. Just as Ibiki was reaching the end of his tirade, having already revealed the hideous scarring on his head, an energetic purple ball smashed through the window. It quickly unraveled into a large banner held in place by precisely thrown kunai, leaving many in the room to gape at the scantily clad woman who had emerged from the bundle, excitedly pointing at all the Chunin hopefuls. This is no time to be celebrating. The woman gave the entire room a chilling smile, although most of the men in the room weren't exactly focused on her face. I am Mitarashi Anko, your second proctor. She pumped her fist up into the air, making her trench coat wave in the breeze to reveal scintillating flesh only barely hidden by a tightly woven mesh shirt. Now, follow me. Once again, you could have heard a pin drop. The silence was so all-encompassing. Naruto actually swore he heard a cicada chirp somewhere outside the window the woman had crashed through. Bad timing, Anko. As the woman sunk a little, an embarrassed blush encroaching across her cheeks, Naruto took a moment to examine her closer as she turned to bicker with Ibiki, taking in her vibrant purple hair and almost pupilless brown eyes. With a start he realized that she was the woman who had originally given him the inspiration for Ramia. He was briefly excited, flicking through the cards he had left to see if she was included. She wasn't, unfortunately. It seemed she was a relatively new proctor. As she turned back to the room, something else caught his eye. It was hidden behind the high collar of her coat, but he definitely caught sight of a small black seal on her neck. Even with his limited experience with fuinjutsu and the simplistic appearance of the seal, he could tell that it was a complicated piece of work. Instantly his interest was piqued by a previously unknown part of him waking up and taking notice. Unfortunately, any further examination was sidelined as Anko seemed to get over her own faux pas and turned back to the examinees. I'll explain everything when we've exchanged places, so follow me. The woman naturally dived straight back out the window she had smashed, leaving a room of 51 confused genin and an exasperated Ibiki. Eventually, the group snapped out of their stupor and made after the woman, not trusting her unpredictability to possibly disqualify them if they were too late. Naruto trailed along after his teammates as they dashed after the rest of the group, but his thoughts were elsewhere, focused on the new feelings circulating his mind after seeing that seal. Naruto had, of course, dabbled in the sealing arts. His puppets would have been woefully less effective without seals to regulate their movements. He had no idea how Suna puppeteers caused their creations to move, but Naruto's moved through seals that he affected with specific pulses of chakra he sent through his threads. They were simplistic at best though, carrying simple, pre-prepared instructions to the aspect of the puppet they controlled. However, it was the way they all linked together in one great array throughout the puppet that Naruto was proud of. However, while he was not unfamiliar with the art, he couldn't say that he had been particularly involved in it before now. True, it came rather easily to him as normally he just needed to think about what he wanted to do and the seals would simply arrange themselves in his mind. It was that same ease that also left him disinterested in the practice. Naruto was so used to challenges and obstacles in his life that having something simply come to him without work seemed almost alien. The lack of challenge left him feeling without accomplishment, so he only used fuinjutsu for what he needed and never just experimented with it like he might poisons, or mechanisms, or designs. Seeing that little, innocuous, inverted Mitsudomo design seemed to spark some flame of completion within him that had previously remained unlit. He felt the sudden urge to compare his own work with somebody else's, an innate desire to be proven superior. As he jogged, Naruto quickly shook his head of that. He was almost starting to sound like Sasuke. That tantalizing sensation of competitive spirit didn't leave him though, so by the time they caught up to everybody outside the familiar chain-link fence of Training Ground 44, he felt a little restless. "Alright my little Chunin hopefuls," Anko called out from the front of the crowd, an all too innocent grin on her features. "You guys are about to find out why this place is called the Forest of Death." Naruto spotted that at his chance to rile up the woman. Naturally, if he wanted to examine that mark some more, he needed to interact with her, interest-equaled interaction. He knew that the quickest way to get someone interested in you was to aggravate or irritate them. People always have the innate desire to see their own opinions win out, so clashing opposing ideals against them created the first strenuous ties of a connection. Wow, big trees and animals, so terrifying, Naruto managed in a perfect deadpan, his expression the epitome of boredom as he stared up at the massive trees that inhabited the large training ground. It helped that he had been in there before to examine the unique wildlife and collect plant samples for poisons. He was expecting the retaliation, as he assumed Anko was the type who didn't like people messing with her mysterious and dread-inducing atmosphere, so he didn't even try to dodge when she threw a kunai to slice his cheek. Tough guys like you are usually the first to get eaten. The woman appeared behind him in what was, admittedly, an impressive show of speed. She leaned over his shoulder to lick up a long line of his blood with the creepiest look of satisfaction she could manage. Around them, Naruto's team very much included, the genin cringed away from the strange and disgusting act. Although, one Kusa genin with long black hair on the other side of the crowd was watching with a strange glint in her eye. Naruto on the other hand smiled lightly, craning his neck to look at the woman. She was intentionally pushing her assets against his back to cause him further discomfort. Thanks for the advice, I'll have to make sure anybody who eats me regrets it soon after. Obviously Anko didn't recognize him, no doubt because of the hood and goggles hiding most of his features. Although the whisker marks on his cheeks should have been a bit of a giveaway, perhaps she just had a bad memory. In either case Naruto quickly flipped a small vial of yellow liquid from one of his pouches and offered it to the woman with a small smirk. You'll be needing this in a few minutes. It was a strange day when Naruto had discovered that his own blood was mildly poisonous, not lethally so of course, but enough to cause discomfort to people who weren't him. It was no doubt the cocktails of different chemicals he kept injecting himself with over the years. What do you? Anko blinked, her vision distorting slightly as a sudden itch caused her to absently scratch at her arm, only for it to persist. Her skin paled and the veins around the edges of her eyes became just a little more prominent. He smirked again as he pressed the tiny vial into her hand and turned back to his team. Didn't someone ever tell you not to lick strange people's blood? Naruto asked quietly, so the other genin couldn't overhear them. It would be better if they had to imagine what the crazy proctor was talking about with the quiet, unperturbed genin. People's imaginations tended to provide a much better image than anything Naruto could have spun for himself. Deciding to just leave the Geninbi for now and focus on why she suddenly felt like she had just woken up with a killer hangover, Anko turned away from Naruto and addressed the rest of the Genin while attempting to keep her face straight. She began explaining the rules of the second exam, all the while trying not to itch her arm where, if you could see under her trench coat as many of the males in the crowd surely wished they could, the veins along her arm were becoming more visible. Naruto kept an ear open but turned back to his team with a small smirk hidden in the shadows of his hood. He was sure Anko would be interested in him now. As he turned back to his team he was only met by an angry-looking Sakura and a fist to the gut. What the hell was that, Naruto Barker? Now you've drawn everybody's attention to us. Her voice was a furious whisper, trying not to exacerbate the damage Naruto had done. Naruto took the blow, it wasn't that strong anyway, but as soon as she released him he looked up, fixing her with a rather chilling smirk. You shouldn't worry so much, Sakura. His goggles flashed in the light for a moment as he gazed at her more intently, his expression becoming a blank slate. But hit me again, and I'll turn you into a puppet. The Pinkett gulped as she nervously took a step back, freaked out by how quickly Naruto's normal expression returned to his face from the momentary lapse. She increasingly got the impression that her quiet teammate wasn't the most stable person. She was saved as Sasuke grunted, butting in on the conversation with a cocky smirk. Weren't you the one who said we shouldn't take unnecessary risks without knowing what the next challenge is? He interjected, parroting Naruto's words from earlier back to him in an attempt to expose his hypocrisy. The blonde just turned his attention away from Sakura and snorted softly. Unknown. We knew from the moment the proctor said she would be cutting the group in half that we would be pitted against one another somehow, Naruto explained dismissively. It would have to be in teams as we passed or failed the first exams as a team. The fact that it takes place here only shows there will be a survival element, meaning the test will get more difficult the more time passes. All I did was make it so we will be targeted, bringing the other competitors to us early so we have a higher chance of confronting them with more energy. In the background, Anko validated his quick summary as she produced 2 types of scrolls and explained the test. Apparently Sasuke wasn't too happy with that as he clicked his tongue and turned away, plunging the team into an awkward silence that persisted as they signed the indemnity forms, collected their heaven scroll and took their place at their assigned gate. Sakura looked as though she wanted to say something so the team wouldn't start off the exam so disjointed. Anything she might have tried was drowned out as the speaker system around the training grounds perimeter blared to life. The second stage of the Chunin exams start now, Anko's voice shouted, garbled by the slight crackle of the speaker. A final piece of advice, the locks to the 17 gates about the forest clicked with the sound of a buzzer, don't die. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.